Why is it that some families grow wealthier with each passing generation, while others watch their fortunes vanish within just a few short years? The answer might surprise you. It's not about the money itself, it's about the mindset. A mindset that either gets passed down like a family heirloom or disappears entirely without a trace. I once shared a simple truth. If you want to give your children something far more valuable than money or assets, give them your philosophy. In this video, I'm going to walk you through how to do exactly that. I'll break down a practical, actionable model that you can begin using right away even today. But first, let's start with a question that might make you a little uncomfortable. How long will your wealth truly last once you're gone? Unfortunately, the numbers don't land, they're harsh. Research shows that by the second generation, 70% of inherited wealth is already gone. And by the time it gets to the third generation, 90% has vanished. Why? Most children of wealthy parents were never taught how to think like wealth builders. They weren't trained in the mindset that created the wealth in the first place. So, they don't just lose the money, they lose the connection to the principles that created it. That, right there, is the real tragedy. I remember a moment from a seminar years ago. A man approached me and said, "My father was wealthy, but I'm barely scraping by. What happened?" I looked at him and said, "Maybe your father left you money, but he didn't leave you the map of how he earned it." And that's exactly what we're diving into today. This conversation isn't just about creating wealth, it's about creating a culture of wealth. It's not only about leaving behind an inheritance, it's about building a living system so that your children and grandchildren don't have to start from zero. Because true wealth, it's not just a number in a bank account, it's a way of thinking, it's a set of values. It's a pattern of behavior that becomes a family tradition, passed down like a sacred code. This is exactly how Jim Rohn thought about legacy. He often said, "A financial legacy is not a stack of bills stuffed in an envelope. It's not real estate or stocks that can be wiped out by a messy divorce or a failed investment. A true legacy is a mindset that can create wealth again and again regardless of external circumstances." And here's the first powerful realization. What you pass on to your kids doesn't start with a written will. It begins with your habits, today, right now. People often ask me, "Jim, where does financial wisdom actually begin?" My answer is always the same: it begins with your example. Children don't remember the long lectures or the serious talks at the dinner table, but they never forget what they see you do. If you don't budget, they won't either. If you only save when something's left over, they'll do the same. If you fear investing, they'll inherit that fear. But here's the flip side. If you model discipline, responsibility, and a deep respect for work, those values sink in far deeper than your DNA. This isn't just theory. I saw it work in real life. One of my clients, a humble farmer from Kansas, once told me he started keeping a financial journal just for himself. Each month, he would record his expenses, income, and any small investments. He didn't do it for show, but after a few years, guess what? His 14-year-old son started doing the same thing without being asked, just by watching. And by the time that boy turned 20, he already had his own investment portfolio. Not because his dad made him, but because his dad lived it. That's the power of example. Kids don't do what you say, they do what you do. So if you truly want to build a long-lasting financial legacy, don't start with your bank account, start with yourself. Jim Rohn didn't grow up with wealth. He was born on a farm in Idaho, and his earliest idea of money was painfully simple. You either have it or you don't. But that all changed when he met his mentor, Earl Chauffet. Earl once told him, "Jim, don't work for money. Work harder on yourself than you do on your Joe band, the money will follow." And you know what? Earl was right. That single idea became the first pillar in Jim's system. Personal growth is the first investment. If you want your children to build wealth, don't just teach them to earn, teach them to grow. Money follows value. Want more income? Become more valuable. Want your son to thrive financially? Don't start with money. Start by teaching him to read good books, sharpen his skills, and embrace challenges. Because true wealth begins not with money, but with character. I once said to someone who was struggling to pass down wisdom, "Then why not begin with yourself?" It's a question we should all ask. Too often, we hope to give our children advice without ever changing the way we live ourselves. But that simply doesn't work. If you want your family to embody wealth, not just in money, but in thinking, you must become the root of that culture. Not a perfect root, but a purposeful one. I wasn't born with financial knowledge, far from it. But I made a choice. I started by tracking my finances. I picked up books on money and self-growth, and over time, I shifted the way I thought. I began to see that invested money working for you was far more valuable than money spent on fleeting wants. That shift wasn't just practical, it became a philosophy for life. After all, it's far better to teach someone how to build wealth than to simply hand it to them. One of my favorite real-world examples of this philosophy comes from families who create something called a financial council. Once a month, they sit down together, parents, kids, sometimes even grandparents, and have honest, thoughtful discussions. They talk about the family budget, future goals, current investments. Imagine that for a moment. Not arguments over who spent too much, but conversations centered around growth, responsibility, and vision. That's not just managing money, that's cultivating a legacy. That's what a financial culture looks like. And the best part, anyone can start it. You don't need to build a grand structure overnight. Start small. Even something as simple as a family piggy bank can be the seed. What matters most is the habit, the intention. I've always believed in a simple truth. Money isn't just a resource, it's a test of whether you can delay short-term wants in favor of long-term purpose. Because short-term thinking says, I want it now. But legacy thinking asks, how will this affect generations to come? This mindset shaped everything I created, including my library of audio programs. I never expected all of my children to become entrepreneurs. That wasn't the goal. But I did want them to think like value creators, people who understand how to offer something meaningful to the world. That, to me, is the real inheritance. That's the system I work to pass on. So, if your dream is to grow a financial tree that bears fruit for your grandchildren, don't begin with a will. Begin with something far more human: a conversation over dinner, a book read aloud, a routine of saving together, an example quietly lived. Because legacy isn't a document you sign, it's a way of life, a pattern that lives on even after you're gone. And if you've ever been to one of my seminars, you already know this. I believe in transformation. More than luck, more than timing. Transformation is what changes lives. And it's exactly what must happen not only in you, but in your children as well. Because here's a cold truth. You can't just leave behind a folder full of stock certificates and expect your children to understand what to do with them. That paper isn't magic. What matters is the mindset behind it. You have to help them see that wealth is a tool, not a trophy, a means to build, not a medal to display. I've seen this lesson up close. I've lived it. At 25, I was drowning in debt. I had a wife, a child, unpaid bills stacked on the kitchen counter, and no clear direction. I didn't inherit a fortune. I didn't inherit a system, but I did attend a talk by Earl Schofield. I wasn't even looking for a legacy model. I was desperate for a way out. What I found instead was something much greater, a mindset powerful enough to reshape an entire generation. A few years later, when I finally stood on stable ground and began to help others, I realized something profound. My job wasn't just to earn, it was to transmit. Not to hoard wealth, but to guide others through it. That is the second level of legacy, transmission. And just imagine this future with me for a moment. Your children don't just know how to count money, they know how to create it. They're not intimidated by the stock market. They understand the value of time, of compounding, of thoughtful investment. They build habits with intention. They know that reputation is wealth, that discipline is a form of power, that value creation matters more than flashy results. And all of that is possible when you pass down not just money, but mindset. I've witnessed firsthand how a shift in financial thinking can transform entire families. One man I mentored took a powerful approach with his children. But instead of simply handing out money for chores or good behavior, he introduced a weekly salary tied to creation. One child had to design a savings plan to buy a bike. Another had to figure out how to earn money through an after-school idea. Over time, their home evolved into something extraordinary, a goals board on the wall, a monthly financial tracker, even a tiny family fund that everyone contributed to and learned from. Was it millions of dollars? No, but it was something far more listing a system. That's legacy in motion. You see, wealth isn't just about numbers on a screen or a figure on a statement. I once said, the best thing you can do for the poor is not become one of them. And I still believe that. Overprotecting your children won't prepare them for life, but teaching them how to stand on their own feet, to think critically, to act with discipline, that's a gift they'll carry forever. You may not be able to leave behind everything, but you can give them something far more powerful, the belief that they are capable of building everything themselves. Throughout my life, I've mentored thousands. Some of them are now millionaires. But do you know what they all had in common? It wasn't a fancy degree. It wasn't a huge inheritance. It was the decision to live by a personal system. They developed a mindset. They wrote down their goals. They lived with clear purpose. And more importantly, they taught that system to their children. One student I mentored achieved financial freedom by the age of 40. He then started a beautiful family tradition each year. Every family member would give a short financial presentation, what they learned, what they tried, and what they discovered over the past year. Can you imagine the impact of that? For those kids, money wasn't scary, it wasn't secret, and responsibility breeds maturity. But you might wonder, what if my kids don't care? What if they tune me out? I've heard that many times. Your job is to live in a way they can't. Ignore I never pressured my kids to become entrepreneurs, but I showed them what self-discipline looked like. I demonstrated what it meant to grow yourself, to push through discomfort, to keep learning. I didn't preach it, I lived it. And that kind of leadership, it leaves a mark. There's a story I love. After one of my talks, a young man came up and said, "Jim, school." After a few weeks, he asked if we could create our own action fund. At first, the father didn't know how to respond, but then he realized this is the real result. This wasn't a grand gesture or $1 million trust. It was a simple step, but small things grow. That's how legacy begins. Because at its core, legacy isn't driven by fear of losing wealth. It's guided by belief in growth, in continuity, in values that outlast any one person. If your entire approach to legacy is based on control, on clinging tightly to every detail, then you're not building a system. You're building dependence. But if you lead with intention and trust, your wisdom to live on without your constant supervision, then you're creating something far more meaningful. That's what my mentor, Earl Schoaf, gave me. He didn't leave me a check. He left me a direction. And everything I've built since then, it started from that. The ripple effect continues to this day. People I've never even met have been changed by what he poured into me. That, my friend, is influence. That's the definition of legacy. So let me ask you now, what will remain of you 20 years from now? Will your children speak about money with confidence and respect? Will they raise their children with a sense of value, of possibility, not just expenses and fear? Will they know how to create rather than just consume? If your answer is unclear, don't worry. That's the beauty of legacy. It doesn't begin when you pass away. It begins the moment your life starts to influence others, even without your direct involvement. And that brings us to the third level of the Jim Rohn system, the living legacy. This level isn't locked away in a safe. It lives in the minds and behaviors of the people who were close to you. I remember once, after speaking in Los Angeles, a man came up to me. He said, "Jim, I can't recall every word you said, but I remember how you made me feel." That was the first time I believed I could change my financial future. And that is where the true legacy begins. And you know what? He was mentoring young people, guiding others with the same mindset he once received. I didn't leave him an inheritance, at least not in the traditional sense, but my philosophy had taken root in him. He became a carrier of that idea, and now he's planting seeds in others. That, to me, is the definition of a true system, something that keeps moving, keeps growing, long after you've stepped away. Just like planting a tree, you may not be around to pick all the fruit, but because you invested yourself into the soil and people, that tree will bear fruit for seasons you'll never see. That's success. Raising children who know how to earn with integrity, think with clarity, and make decisions without fear. But you know what takes it to the next level? When they pass those principles onto their children, their business partners, their friends. That's not just success, that's legacy. Many people don't fear death itself, they fear that nothing will remain when they're gone. To tell you, you can leave behind more than a house or a savings account. You can leave principles. You can leave behind a way of thinking, a vision for living. I once asked a student, "What do you want your son to know after you're gone?" He paused and said, "I want him to know that fear is never a reason to retreat, that discipline isn't a gadget's freedom, and that money is the result of value." I smiled and said, "Then don't wait. Start teaching him that now, not just with your words, but through your life." I still remember the first time I heard the phrase, moral capital. It came from a seasoned businessman I met in Arizona. He told me, "Jim, I'm not as worried about my investment portfolio as I am about the portfolio of ideas I'll leave behind." That struck a chord, because the most important capital we have isn't stored in banks, it's stored in minds. We leave our children money, but not mindset. They might lose everything. But if we leave them mindset of in without the money, they'll know how to build from scratch. That's not just a nice-sounding phrase, it's history. I came from poverty. I know what it's like to begin with no capital, no connections, and no guarantees. I also know what changes a life. The decision to stop living by circumstances and start living by principles. That's what I've shared through my seminars, my books, my audio programs, but above all, through the way I lived. And now, I see people who sat in my audience 20 or 30 years ago, teaching those very principles to their grandchildren. That's not just education. That's a system. That's a living legacy. Someone once asked me, "Jim, what's the point of all this success if you have no one to share it with?" I told them, success without transmission is just a story, but success that becomes a system, that's a story with a sequel. And that's why I believe the highest form of wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's when your life becomes a source not through charity, but through the power of example. Just imagine this with me. Your family has a coda set of financial principles they live by. Beliefs. Things like always save 10%, always invest in growth, always tell the truth in business, always seek long-term value. These aren't slogans, they are guideposts, and they shape how your children see the world. Children raised in a house with principles don't grow up in confusion, they grow up with clarity. They may still face challenges, all do, but they'll know how to respond. And that might be the most powerful thing you can ever pass down, an inner compass. Because money comes and goes, businesses evolve, but some principles, like the ones that helped me in 1970s, to work today. Respect, responsibility, living within your means, valuing time, investing in knowledge. Asking yourself right now, what will I leave behind? Don't let your mind jump straight to property or possessions. Think about the lessons you've lived, the stories you can tell. Lies not in having once created wealth, but in having created the mindset that makes wealth possible again and again. That is the legacy system. That is the Jim Rohn path. And now, it can become your path to dot. So let me shift my voice here, not just as a speaker in a video, but as someone speaking directly to you, not just as a viewer, but as a creator, and perhaps even an heir. Everything we've talked about, this isn't abstract philosophy. These are real, practical actions. But they only work if you do more than just watch this video and then go back to life as usual. Wisdom doesn't transfer by osmosis. It transfers through example, through action, through small, daily decisions. So here's what I ask of you. Pause for a moment. Step outside yourself. Look at your life as if you were observing from afar, not your job title, your income, or your social status, but from the lens of influence. What are you really passing on? To your children, if you have them, to your coworkers, to anyone who sees you and silently takes you as an example. Even if you don't have children of your own yet, your influence is already at work. Your habits, your words, the way you treat money, all of it is shaping someone's perception. You might be part of someone's story right now, whether you realize it or not. So let's pause and do a quick, honest self-assessment just between you and you. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 means I never do this and 10 means I do it consistently and systematically. How would you rate yourself in these 5 key areas? First, how regularly do you save a portion of every income you receive, even just a small percentage? Second, How clearly can you articulate the financial principles you'd want to pass down to the next generation? Not vague, idea-specific, teachable values. Third, how disciplined are you about tracking your finances? Do you at least record basic expenses, income, and investments? Fourth, how open and intentional are you about discussing money in your family? Do you create moments where financial wisdom can be shared, not just assumed? And fifth, how much of your personal financial behavior would you honestly consider a strong example for others to follow? Now, take a moment to rate yourself in each area, not to judge, not to impress anyone, but to know where you stand. And once you do, look closely which number is the lowest. That's not your weakness, that's your growth zone. That's where your journey starts. Choose that area and make it your priority for the next 7 days. You don't have to overhaul your entire life, just begin. If you've never saved, start with $5. If you've never tracked expenses, open a simple note and start with 1 column. If you've never talked to your kids or spouse about money, share one small story, maybe from your own childhood. That first step doesn't have to be impressive. It just has to be taken. Because progress doesn't come from how big your action is. It comes from your decision to act. It's tempting, I know, to say, I'll start Monday or next month when things calm down. But Jim Rohn warned us, later is a trap. Tomorrow is a trap. There are only 2 paths. Either you live by principles or you live by excuses. So here's my challenge to you. Take a sheet of paper right now. Write down your 5 scores. Circle the lowest one. Then, underneath write, I will work on this for the next 7 days. And do it. No drama, no perfectionism, just simple, focused intention. And one more thing. Scroll down and leave a comment under this video. Tell us which question was hardest for you and what small step you're going to take first. This isn't just to boost engagement. This is about community. Because maybe, just maybe, your comment will spark someone else to take their first step. That's how living systems grow. That's how legacy takes action. And if you haven't already subscribed, is the moment. Because the next video might not just change your story, it might change your entire family's trajectory. And if you believe in this message, click like, share it with someone who needs it, and leave your voice in the comments. Because wisdom doesn't live in words, lives in movement, in shared movement. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a truth that changed my life forever. Don't seek ease, seek strength, because when you are strong, everything else becomes easier. If you want to pass on wealth, then become a source of strength. If you want to leave behind more than things, then live in such a way that your mindset takes root in others. That 'tis what true legacy looks like. That is the Jim Rohn system. And now, it can be your system. You could be the first person in your family to build a culture of financial wisdom. You could be remembered not just as the one who earned, but as the one who taught. And trust me, that is far more valuable, because money can disappear. But wisdom passes from heart to heart, generation after generation. So today, choose strength. Choose the path that leaves a mark. Choose not just accumulation, but transmission. And then, your life becomes more than a moment. It becomes part of a story that keeps going, long after your journey ends. So, as we come to the end of this journey together, I want to leave you with one final thought. You don't need to be a financial expert. You don't need a perfect past or a flawless plan. All you need is the courage to begin, right where you are, with what you have, in the life you're already living, because legacy doesn't wait for the right time. It begins the moment you choose to live with intention, when you shift from surviving to building, from reacting to leading, and every choice from today forward becomes a brick in the foundation of something greater than yourself. Remember, what you teach through your actions outlives what you earn, and the system you build through discipline, wisdom, and example can become the greatest gift your family, your team, or your community will ever receive. If this video moved you, if it sparked even one small realization, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to the channel, because we're just getting started. Leave a comment, share your next step, your challenge, or your commitment. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that their life can still plant seeds that grow. For generations, you have the power to break cycles. You have the power to begin traditions. You have the power to leave behind more than wealth. You can leave behind wisdom, And that is the legacy worth building. Thank you for watching. Until next time, keep growing, keep giving, and keep living with purpose.